Do I see everybody here? There are a few folks from back. We are all delighted you are here. This is a rather special occasion for a whole bunch of reasons. The first meeting of the Women's Forum was held here in 1974. Exactly. And I only remember my own experience a few years earlier at the Harvard Club, having to go through a side door and waiting for, there are a few other people that have those nasty memories of the Harvard Club. So the fact that we don't have a podium tonight, I think is the Harvard Club's revenge. They know we remember. Exactly. I am delighted you're here, and all of my buddies and friends up here are delighted you're here. Special welcome tonight, and thrilled that Jane Guggenheimer is here, Elly's daughter-in-law. And even more special, if it can be, is the fact that Elly's great-granddaughter, Rose Horowitz, is here. We're thrilled, absolutely thrilled. Tonight, as some of you know, would have been Elly's 112th birthday. And you better believe she's here. She's been talking to all 6 of us for the last several weeks on how she wants this done. And Elly, we hope we're doing it right. And so here we go. I met Elly 43 years ago. I'd just given birth to my second son. I couldn't believe the lack of reasonably good, affordable childcare in the United States. I was ticked off. And I said to a colleague at work that I was really annoyed, and she said, "You ought to meet somebody else who's just as annoyed as you are." And that's how I met Elly. I called her up. We arranged to meet at one of her favorite hangouts, which was the 21. Right. So we arrive at the 21, and it was like a scene out of Hello, Dolly. The maitre d' and the waiters all lined up and said, "Hello, Elly." That's when I knew I was in the presence of greatness. Elly was as close to me as my own mom. In fact, they were a year apart. Elly was a Park Avenue lady, but she was not a lady who lunched. She was furious women were sidelined. She was furious women did not have the old boys network that her beloved Randy had with his friends from Yale around the country. So what did she do? She created 11 organizations to empower women, create child care programs, and improve the lives of the elderly. Elly made people feel as though she was their best friend. And all 6 of us up here know that Elly loved us best, each one of us. So before I turn the program over to Muriel, I have one last Elly-ism. Many of us know that Elly was an extraordinary poet, a terrific songwriter. And even as she suffered in her final years, she never lost her love of music. So I thought you might enjoy hearing Elly, in her own words, describe the day she was born. "I arrived here at noon, not a minute too soon," Mother said as she sang me a rockabye tune. "She's a positive pearl, but her hair doesn't curl, and I didn't expect to give birth to a girl. I'd have had much more joy if she'd just been a boy. Well, perhaps she'll grow up to be gentle and coy." Exactly, that didn't happen, did it? Though my sex was deplorable, I was adorable. At least that's what Mother reported. Her sister just snorted. Well, my birth wasn't news that was joyfully hailed. The big news that day was the Titanic had sailed. The newspaper editors must have been manic. They featured not me, but the SS Titanic. Well, I lay there all wet in my new bassinet, just sucking my thumb and appearing quite dumb. Illusory, yes, because right from the start, it was perfectly clear I was totally smart. Time went past, I matured and had 2 charming boys, and the house was all full of their masculine toys. But I didn't produce, with my feminine lib, what Adam produced using only 1 rib. What I wanted to add is today is a joy, and now I'm glad I wasn't a boy. As well as you wonderful friends whom I treasure, being female is a definite pleasure. Beside, being female with friends, one is perfectly alone. Being female is, after all I've ever known. So there she is. Happy birthday, Elly, from all of your friends and family. And now, on to Muriel.
I go. Thank you so much, Dee Dee. It's just such a joy to be here and to see so many good friends. What a treat. I remember Elly as a pioneer with vision way ahead of her time. Back in 1948, long before NOW was founded, Elly organized the Daycare Council of New York. And in 1958, she founded the Daycare and Child Development Council of America. Elly acted on the need for child care far ahead of most other people. And then, after NOW and the feminist movement had begun to fight for child care, in 1983, Elly launched the Child Care Action Campaign, known as CCAC. I was on her board of directors. And Elly proclaimed, quote, "There's a crisis in child care in America. We've got to get the word out." CCAC mobilized leaders to tell the world that there was a serious shortage of child care, that much of what existed was not of good quality, and that its cost was beyond the reach of the typical working family. CCAC was a valuable force for 20 years, and we sure could use her today. Then in 1973, as we know, Elly created the Women's Forum of New York that serves us all so well. We talked it over at that luncheon of 2 Eleanors and 2 Muriels, but Elly was the founder. At first, she argued against bylaws. She didn't like structure. But we soon realized we needed structure because the forum was growing so fast. In 1981, she made our forum nationwide with a glorious national get-together in Phoenix. Elly wrote a wonderful musical for the occasion that nobody will forget. The lyrics were so witty, and we were all so clumsy and dancing to her songs. And I'm glad to see that Donna Shalala is here today because she was one of those who misstepped with me for Elly's musical. Then in 1983, she made us a worldwide phenomenon with the International Women's Forum, and that's the same year she started CCAC. Here's something most feminists do not know. The National Women's Political Caucus had its original beginning in Elly's Park Avenue apartment in 1970. There was so much internal bickering that NWPC didn't have its official launching until July 1971, but it started in that Park Avenue apartment. And let me get in a plug for my book, which is called The Women's Revolution, which is coming out in June, and there's a lot about Elly and a lot about the Women's Forum in it, and it points out the role that Elly played in the caucus as well as everything else she touched. In the meantime, Elly served as New York City's director of the Department of Consumer Affairs, and she was the first woman serving on the New York City Planning Commission. Then, in 1979, Elly founded still another trailblazing organization, the Council for Senior Citizens and Centers, which stressed the role that seniors can play in creating a better society for everyone. And also, we shouldn't forget that she founded and led the New York Women's Agenda in 1992, focusing attention on the needs of women everywhere. Now, if that wasn't enough, Elly wrote a book about gracious entertaining, and she wrote a delightful musical that enjoyed a nice run off Broadway. She called it Potholes, and I don't know how many forum members remember, but I wrote a little musical dedicated to Elly, which the forum produced, and one of our songs was called Assholes. And and Elly was always a visionary and innovative and lots of fun to be with. She was one in a trillion, and we were lucky to be living with her and working with her, and we're all happy to be celebrating her birthday tonight. Thank you.
And now we're going to hear from Suzanne Dowling. Suzanne was the forum's first executive director, and at times the person who made sure that the wheels stayed on. So, Suzanne, over to you, darling.
Thank you so much. So my story will take us to Elly's mischievous side, which was a lot of fun. Elly and Randy inherited a black toy poodle named Lacey from Randy's sister, Sophie. Lacey became Elly's constant companion, especially after dear Randy passed. In the early 2000s, Elly and Lacey were entrusted to my care as we embarked on a trip to Washington, D.C. to attend an IWF conference. A 2-bedroom suite had been booked at the hotel happily. There was a walking garden accessible from our rooms. Guess who got to walk Lacey several times a day? Wherever we went, Lacey traveled in a large Sherpa bag. She was so small, no one would know what was in the bag. The trip to D.C. was uneventful. I had cautioned Elly not to show Lacey to anyone, for it was against Amtrak policy to have uncaged pets on the train. Elly, being Elly, simply couldn't resist showing off adorable Lacey to a kind conductor who gave us a pass, but who cautioned us to keep her in the bag. Fast forward to our return trip on Saturday morning. Several forum members, one of whom is here, joined us on the train. Amidst the usual chatter, of course they had to meet Lacey. Out of the Sherpa bag pops her little head, just as the nastiest conductor on the planet loomed. He was having none of our charms, protestations, and promises to keep her in a zippered bag. Off he thundered, off this train. Elly and I, Sherpa bag in tow, gathered our bags and tried to exit the train with some dignity. To say she was upset is an understatement. I tried to calm her, saying, "Never mind, we'll take the next train, and Lacey will not show her face." Elly agreed. I went to rebook our tickets and was rebuffed. The nasty conductor had radioed back that we would probably try to do that and to refuse us as we were traveling with an unsecured animal who was this big. "We know who you are," said the ticket agent to me. "You cannot travel with the dog in the bag." Elly was getting slightly frantic. The car rental desks were just a few steps away. I whipped out my Enterprise card and booked a car for drop-off in New York. What a fun trip that was. Come on, Elly. It's a lovely day, and we're driving home. It was a lovely trip. Lacey sat on Elly's lap the whole way, sticking her head out the window, as dogs love to do. We stopped for lunch and a walk, and laughed and laughed. First and last time I ever drove a dog to Park Avenue. Even in her difficult, waning days, Elly would hold my hand and laugh about our road trip with Lacey.
Wonderful stories to tell, but I would also let you know one that she probably will not tell, and that is that she and Elly would love to talk dirty stories. And lots of them, and she adored it. Over to you, love.
Yeah, you can laugh about that trip home, but it was torture for me when we got thrown off the train. I went back, I was so happy you were there, Suzanne. So, is this on? Yeah. It is, okay. Sorry, so, what I'm going to do, because Susie Greenwood's boyfriend, Mike, was the one who typed up, Jim.
He should be here.
Jim, he should be here. He's the one who was typing up Elly's autobiography. She was writing it, and I was editing it.
He went there every day for months.
Yeah, and so the two of us really worked on getting the book written, and it's been such a labor of love to finally get it published. I mean, I had this only copy that I was sitting on for all of these years, and then I badgered Esther to get this thing published for us before the 50th anniversary. So we finally got this done. And
Let me just interrupt. Everybody, Esther Margolis has done this. Children were born easier.
Really, for all the years. And I'm sorry that Jim is not here because he did so much work on this.
I wish Jim were here.
I do. I wish he were here.
He spent so many days
He did.
helping her with this book.
He did. And then, so what I want to do is I want to read you two stories that I made her put in the book. They were not in the original copy as I was editing it. But I knew so many of her stories, and I said, no, these two stories have to be in the book. So one you're going to find, and you should all have a copy of the book.
Everybody has.
Yeah, one you're going to find on page 186. So I'm just going to briefly go through that with you. In the early 1960s, a commonly used phrase by well-organized neighborhood groups was NIMBY, which stood for Not in My Backyard. We would be particularly alarmed if families from other races, religions, or economic levels moved in, NIMBY. Any group that felt strongly about strangers moving into their area could keep a public hearing going for 12 or more hours. At this time, Elly was on the Planning Commission, the New York City Planning Commission. The Planning Commission hearing on the East Village development proposals was held in City Hall. On that morning in March 1962, the seats in the meeting room were all filled with people who were standing against walls. There were police standing there because there was so much concern about what would happen at this hearing. There was so much revolting against the Planning Commission. Actually, the hearing continued until 4 in the morning, setting, I suspect, some kind of record. The East Village witnesses had reinforcement troops whom they apparently summoned as testifiers during the long night. We had no such resources, but fortuitously, we did have an unexpected source of support that enabled us to survive in rather good shape until 4 a.m. What we had expected would be a tense and even frightening experience became, as the clock above the main door ticked off the hours, an almost delightful experience, all because of an aberrational act on my part. By 6 in the evening, the commissioners had already become wary of the abrasive testimony and the obvious antagonism of the witnesses. The chairman called a recess at 6:30 to allow us to have a quick supper before continuing on through the night. We commissioners walked over to a nearby restaurant, ordered drinks, and at that point, I had the sudden impulse. I recruited our public relations staff executive who had joined us for dinner and was always ready for anything that promised to be entertaining. We quietly negotiated for a gallon jug of martinis, which we carried back to City Hall in a large shopping bag. Arriving in the hearing room in advance of my fellow commissioners, who were still enjoying their desserts in the restaurant, we hastily replaced the water in the sink on the dais with the martinis in the jug. In due course, the commissioners returned from the restaurant, and the public that had filled the seats in the hearing room also returned. The hearing resumed, and after a rather brief interval, our chairman poured a drink from the pitcher in front of him, took a swallow, looked astonished, and the way that Elly described the story to me, she went, he drank it and went, stared from right to left at the commissioners on the dais, shrugged his shoulders, and chugged down the water. During the next hour or so, each of the commissioners in turn became thirsty and poured drinks for themselves from their pitchers. To make this disgraceful confusion short, although the night seemed rather long, by midnight, the audience of speakers from the East Village community was obviously suffering from exhaustion and bewilderment. The bewilderment was the result of the commissioners' astonishingly bright, happy, and impervious to insult attitude. That hearing should go down in history as one of the most jovial and productive of its kind, with jocular, kindly commissioners reacting inappropriately to the insults of the testifying public. By midnight, we were smiling down at a thoroughly astonished audience. I've never been sure whether I had done that night, with what I had done that night caused the hearing to be illegal. And I have never until now confessed my role in creating the warm and pleasant atmosphere in a meeting that had been earlier angrier and divisive. I have sometimes wondered whether I inadvertently stumbled on a possible cure for international friction. Imagine a world in which leaders who are all in a mild state of intoxication carry out negotiations. So that was one of the two stories. I know I Marefoot in the book, and you will enjoy that in the book. And then on page 198 in the book, you will see another story. Thomas Hoving, the new director of the museum, was innovative and no slave to custom. Director Hoving called me at the Planning Commission office with information he thought would be of interest. He had just received official word that the Egyptian government was proceeding with plans to flood the Upper Nile, which would result in the destruction of a number of ancient and irreplaceable historical structures. Some of the structures were being offered as gifts to various organizations that could provide suitable space for the reconstruction of the historic treasure and appropriate placements. The Temple of Dendor, an impressive early Egyptian structure, was among the treasures to become available. Competition was vigorous. A number of cultural organizations located in various cities around the world were competing for the prize. Mr. Hoving said, if we can put together enough money to guarantee creating a structure to enclose the temple so that we can assure Egypt that we'll be able to protect this ancient treasure from being destroyed by the weather and polluted atmospheres, I think New York City can win it. No one on our commission objected when I told them that I had brashly assured Mr. Hoving that the funds for enclosing the temple would be provided in our capital budget. We owe a debt of gratitude to Mr. Hoving for his part in obtaining it. I also allot some applause to myself for what I can only define as chutzpah, a Yiddish word that defies translation, but means, roughly, you've got some nerve. I had no legal right to promise the necessary funds, and what she didn't put in here was another one of her lies. which was that when she went to the commission, the planning commission, she told them that Egypt called New York and offered the Temple of Denver to New York if the planning commission would come up with the money. So she didn't want to put both lines in here. She wanted the lines in here. But the reason we have the Temple of Denver is because of Elly's fatwa. Wow. So.
Thank you, Edie. That's absolutely fascinating. And nobody will look at the Temple of Denver quite the same. It'll be different. Susie Greenwood, you are not only a very, very close friend, but also a matchmaker, which I did not realize until we got to talking.
Well, before I get into the few remarks I scratched out, there were two. You've already had one. Oh, you've already had one, which is warmest thanks to Esther for an incredible job on that book, and that's right here. And also, wait, before anybody claps, number two, Dee Dee, your wonderful, wonderful leadership, but especially for the incredible work you did to make tonight a reality. I wish I had thought about the songs, because we were just talking about that up here. Some of you must have heard it years ago. I know Ellen did. I don't know if anybody else. Elly wrote an incredible song, If You Knew Susie Like I Knew Susie, for me. I forgot. You must have been there too, Susie Jaffe. It could have been both of us. But she was just incredible. The songs just rolled off of her. They were just there. And Jane and Rose, we're so happy you're here. It makes it more special for us to have you with us tonight. So, hi, I'm so happy to be part of this really terrific program honoring Elly. I admire and have lots of love for Elly and her husband, Randy. Randy, of course, was the love of Elly's life. He was special, he had a wonderful sense of humor, and he was kind. And they were marvelous together. I have great affection for Randy, and while I think of him, I have to give warmest thanks to Suzanne Dowling right here for reminding me that Mickey Siebert, bless her heart, Mickey made sure that all of us would always think of Randy Guggenheimer as the one man who was a member of the Women's Forum, is the only man who has today, to this date, that distinction. Jim deserves a lot for the book, but Randy really will always be a member of this organization. As Edie mentioned, Jim McMillan is my significant other. We've been together 25 years. It was unbelievable how much time he spent with Elly on this book. He lived in her apartment, and it was as Edie saw, it was on the floor of one of the closets, is how this book happened, and we're so blessed to have it. Jim and I went out with him many times. It was always great fun. A little more than a year after we lost Randy, as you just said, I have the reputation. I introduced Elly to Julius Edelstein. I don't know how many of you know who he was. I had met him. We were both on the same government board. Julius had worked with Elly many years before this time, when both of them were involved. They were involved a long time in the New York City government. I was just delighted when Julius told me that he'd had a crush on her for years. So I was now introducing them after years and years, but he said he'd had a crush on her for many, many years. Many of you in this room, good friends of mine, know two things. One, as Edie said, I've been a matchmaker. I'm not Edie, both of you have been a matchmaker, not by design, but it's just worked out that way because I've really always loved introducing my friends to each other. And again, for many of you who know me, you would know that when we're talking about Elly and Julius and all this, that the first thing I would do quickly was invite them to dinner. So a week after I met Julius, I had them both at my house for dinner. They had many common interests. As I mentioned earlier, they were both involved in the New York City government. Julius was actually the executive vice chairman of the New York Citizens Committee for Kennedy and Johnson. He was later executive assistant to Robert Wagner, and in 1961 he became a New York City deputy mayor. After I introduced them, they spent a great deal of time together. He was absolutely crazy about her, and she was happy to spend time with him. She wasn't as crazy about him as he was about her. But she liked him a lot. And we were just delighted to watch them enjoy each other's company. For me, it was such a great pleasure for many, many long years of friendship with Elly. She will always have a special place in my heart. And my dearest friend, as many of you know, Ellen Stillsley is here. Ellen knew Elly very well also. And afterwards, I'm sure there'll be comments. I'm sure she has many thoughts and stories to share with us.
Thanks, Susie. Thank you. Last but not least is my dear friend Marcy Sims, who has some special recollections of Elly.
But I've edited them down so that we can have time for everyone else. I first met Elly in 1977 when I was assistant to R. Peter Strauss, president of WMCA. R. Peter, the husband of Ellen Strauss and the father of Jeannie Strauss. I didn't know any of this when I took the job. It was my first job after grad school. Elly was commissioner of consumer affairs and had a weekly listener call-in radio program called Call for Action. In the control room, listening and watching that first time, it was immediately apparent that Elly was plugged in, driven, charming, competent, and witty. She handled each caller with just a touch of empathy and a lot of cheerleading. Each call ended with a to-do plan. Elly's command of the city's civics was a how-to handbook of city politics. There wasn't a part of the city or a person holding office that Elly didn't have vast contacts for in her Rolodex. Almost a decade later, when I was COO and president of Sims, our paths crossed again, this time over Democratic politics. She entered my life for keeps this time. Elly was a role model. She showed me that it was shameful not to use a platform to its fullest. It represented opportunity and responsibility. In her role as social entrepreneur, Elly could mobilize and inspire others, as we all know. She had visions, and she could articulate those visions in ways that people got enchanted, got mobilized, were moved, never forgot her vision. I could never say no to Elly. Who could? Trying to think of a funny story that involved Elly was challenging for me, actually. Most of the time we spent together was plotting, strategizing, or soliciting. But here's one of several moments that did pop out. One day, I had the pleasure of accompanying Elly in the back seat of a car up to her and Randy's beloved Westchester Country Club. It was going to be quality time. And I was going to wind up at the Sims store in Westchester after dropping her at the country club. Elly was, for many years, the creator, writer, and often player in their annual parody productions at the country club. Elly's extraordinary gifts as a lyricist, of which we've heard samples of her poetry, but she not only did the lyrics, but she wrote whole productions. And she was rewriting when we were in the back seat of the car and getting such joy at her editing while it was, I mean, she was her best audience. It was delightful. And, you know, she'd laugh at her jokes, and it was totally infectious, as we know Elly's laugh. And so, but sitting there in the backseat of the car, we soon found out that the lead of that night's production was not feeling well. And after summoning the appropriate compassion on the phone, Elly hung up and looked at me and said, "What fun!" She relished the opportunity to play multiple roles, to be the writer, to be the producer, to be the lead performer. That, I believe, was a quintessential Elly moment. Always willing, always capable, and able to lead at a moment's notice. And what a singular leader she was. Aren't we lucky we got to follow? What fun. Thank you.
And now is your time. We'd like to open this up to your stories, your thoughts, and I promised Karen Wallace. Karen, where are you? Karen? Karen wanted to be here tonight. She wanted to talk about how Elly had changed her life. There you are. Grand, good.
Thank
Over to
you.
Karen.
Thank you so much. And thank you. What a gift to hear the six of you share such beautiful stories about Elly, who I won't claim was a BFF of mine, but was certainly a beloved role model and mentor. And I'm thrilled to be here as part of this evening. Thank you to Ricky Kleeman for mentioning that she had played such an important role in my life, and I'm happy to take less than 3 minutes to share that. Now, I thought that 1984 was a very busy year for me because while working 80-hour weeks on Wall Street, I was training to run the New York City Marathon, and I founded a young professional women's organization that was featured in the New York Times. But then shortly thereafter, I was introduced to Eleanor Guggenheimer, who was in the midst of founding the Child Care Action Campaign, and I got to learn the true meaning of the word busy. I will never forget meeting Elly for the first time because I was supposed to be the 22-year-old with boundless energy, but found myself shocked that I was struggling to keep up with her brisk pace of this 72-year-old whirlwind as she led me through the hallways of her office at record speed. I had no idea that day of the decades-long collaboration of activism and collegial friendship that had just begun. While Elly was supportive of my efforts to organize my female peers through CCAC, she also quickly contributed to our education about pressing issues such as childcare, parental leave policies, and the flexible workplace, which 2 years later led to our organizations issuing a position paper on the subject and turned into a New York Times feature entitled Feminism Lures Young Allies. The same could definitely have been said about Elly. When I decided to apply to business school, Elly ended up writing such a persuasive letter of recommendation for my application that I ended up moving to Boston to earn my MBA at Harvard and to work as a strategy consultant. My timing of returning to New York City in 1992 was perfect. Elly was launching the New York Women's Agenda, just as I was organizing the Harvard Business School's first Women's Alumni Network. So we became one of NYWA's first member organizations, and I subsequently spent more than a dozen years on the decade of the annual NYWA breakfast at the Hilton, being introduced along the way to Elly's unparalleled network of women leaders. Elly's lasting legacy is rooted in her network of truly extraordinary reach and longevity, as evidenced even years after her passing, including tonight. A few years ago, I had less than a minute with Hillary Clinton at a gathering where I could have mentioned any one of a number of people we knew in common. But in the less than 60 seconds that I had her attention, I focused on our mutual friendship with Elly. It says everything about the true love and esteem that people have for Elly, that within the hour at that same gathering of more than 150 guests, Hillary spontaneously singled out Elly during her public remarks by referencing our conversation. Elly, the blessing of meeting you 40 years ago is truly a gift that just keeps on giving and giving and giving. May your memory continue to be a blessing to us all.
Now, this is your time. Really, we'd love to hear from you. All right, good. Elly Silver, welcome.
Okay, where should I go? Over here. Okay, I met
Elly when I was president of the Financial Women's Association. And Elly heard I did market research, and she decided I was going to help her with the Child Care Action Committee. So I gathered research with her. I'm so glad to hear all of you talk about it. And we went, I don't know, my bosses stood for it, but we went to different corporations to present about the need and what they needed to do. So an amazing experience. I had never met anyone like Elly. I came out of BBDO where, quite frankly, I hit the glass ceiling and I was in a new world now, and so grateful for Elly. Elly and Randy were neighbors, they were friends. When my father died, Elly paid a private visit to me to talk to me about life, which I never forgot. And then when Susie Greenwood and I were preparing for our Benot Mitzvah, which was in New York, and then in Israel for the year 2000 for the IWF meeting, Elly sat us down and she helped us entwine what we said with the history of the women's movement. And she reminded us that women were not allowed to have bat mitzvahs in the Jewish religion. In New York, but in Israel, yeah, exactly. But in Israel, she helped us with this incredible story about the progress of women. So always grateful to Elly. And I have one Lacey story too. I'm sorry Carol Hyatt isn't here tonight, because after Randy died, it was the summer, and Carol and Gordon invited us to come up to the Berkshires. Well, we sat in Elly's living room for a long time before Elly finally agreed to go, because she'd never done anything like this before. And Lacey was coming too. And Lacey got to go to Tangle too, because Marty, my boyfriend, snuck Lacey in. He had Elly on one arm, Lacey on the other arm, and we never got caught, Suzanne. So it was an amazing evening. She was incredible. Forever grateful to Elly. Love her. Love her. Thank you.
I first met Elly, I guess it was in the early about 1976. And I'm Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. And we're going to pass it this year with Marcy. I'm not kidding. And have it recognized as part of the Constitution. At the time, I was working for Manfred Orenstein, who was the Democratic leader of the state Senate. And I was the executive director of the advisory committee to the Democrats of the state Senate. And many of you were members of that committee. I see Muriel Fox and Suzanne Jaffe and probably many more. And Manfred Orenstein came to me, he says, Carolyn, I want you to get Elly Guggenheimer to join the committee. And furthermore, I want you to get her to run for the state Senate. So I said, okay. I called her up and I went to see her. She had an office in her home. So we went down to her office and she agreed to join the advisory committee. And then I was telling her how we would help her run for the Senate. She would be a great candidate. We would defeat a Republican and help build a Democratic majority and how important it was. And she looked at me, she said, Carolyn, I think it's wonderful. And if I ran, I would definitely win. But I cannot run. And I said, why, Elly? Why can't you run? You're going to win, and this is going to be so great for you and for the state, the city, the country. And she sits there and she says, Carolyn, I can't do it because it would disrupt my sex life. I swear to God, that was what she said. And I had to go back and tell the senator the story. And so the senator looks at me and says, that's a very good excuse. But anyway, she didn't run for the state Senate, but we became friends through the advisory committee and worked together. Now, all of us who knew Elly knew she was a great organizer, She started a different organization every other day. So she started this breakfast club on the east side where we'd all get together and meet and plan certain things. And one time she kept me after this is before I ever ran for the city council or Congress or anything. She kept me afterwards and she said, Carolyn, I'm going to give you an assignment. And I said, okay. She says, "You must speak at my funeral." I said, "Elly, what are you talking about? You're so vibrant. What are you talking about?" She said, "I think that you're going to be very important, and I want you to speak at my funeral." Well, I was like stunned. No one had ever told me that I was important for anything, and that the honor of being invited to speak at her funeral, which of course I couldn't do because I was voting in the United States Congress, and every vote counts, and you have to be there. But I was very struck by that, and then she encouraged me to run for the city council, which I later did, and which I then ran for Congress. She was a great, great organizer, and she would organize like no one I've ever seen before. She'd call you to her house, and her great passion was childcare. So she would bring you into his room with 4 or 5 other people who got things done, and she'd say, "Well, listen, Carolyn, you've got to get hearings at the city council. You've got to get a meeting with the mayor." She was giving out assignments. She'd give out all these assignments, then she'd leave the room, and there you were. Seriously, she did this over and over again. She'd call you in, "You've got to be at this meeting. I got to tell you something very important." And she said, "This is what we got to do. We got to move the child care bill, Carolyn." And I did move the child care bill. We created a commission on child care, and I wrote a bunch of bills named after my daughter, Virginia, the Virginia Plan, that was quickly adopted by the nation. I thought they'd adopt the daycare bills. They never did. I went to Congress, and daycare bills were the first things I introduced for everybody. I did finally get through daycare for the birth of a child, paid leave for the birth of a child. We were one of 2 countries that did not have that. I was proud of passing that. And then also daycare for all federal employees, and we were working for everybody else. It's very, very important. But my passion and leadership came from Elly Guggenheimer. I remember when Hillary got elected, or rather Bill got elected, and we had a dynamic First Lady. She was so thrilled, and she called me up. She said, "You got to come to the house. I got to show you something." So I came over to the house, and Hillary and Bill had given her an award, really like a little award, like she was, like the military wears. And she was so proud of that, and that she was so happy that we had a Democratic president. And all I can say is that she was remarkable beyond belief. The fact that all of us are here today to pay tribute to her in an organization that is now not only worldwide, it's not only U.S.-wide, it's worldwide, created by Eleanor. Pardon me? 8,000 members. Thank you, Elly Guggenheimer, for so much, for inspiring us, leading us, showing us the way. You live in all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thank you.
I will. My name is Marie-Monique Steckel, and I met Elly in 1980-something. I am French, as you can hear, even though I've lived here forever with an American husband. And I joined in Paris a women's group called Women's Forum Club L. At the time it was Club L. And what happened is Club L, we were very, I had just finished running a political campaign, and then I did other things. But anyway, they said to me, Marie-Monique, you live in New York. Now you are a member, and you should really now organize a Club L Women's Forum in New York. And I said, oh my God, yes, of course, I should. But it might be easier to find another organization which already exists. And then we can sort of be sisters, and we can work together. And they said, oh, well, will you find one? And so I came back to New York, and I said, I looked around, and people talked to me, and so on. And they said, you should meet Elly Guggenheimer. Of course, this is the place where you should meet her. So she invited me in her apartment for breakfast. And there was also, she invited somebody else called Myrna Weiss at the time. And she said, oh, this is a good idea to have sort of branch out of New York and of the US and do something, and maybe we should do that. And so we did, and they did. And at the time, so it was now, with 40 years later, and you have 8,000 members, and all this was because of her vision. You mentioned vision, and her vision was, yes, let's band all together and let's have cultural discussions and what other people do. And she was really she was curious. And nobody mentioned, but I think she was the most elegant woman. Voilà. Merci.
So, we have other people. What about you, my dear? You remember Elly from those early days? Yes.
I'm not sure I can add much to Elly's story. She had me on speed dial before there was speed dial. And I knew that she was the first social entrepreneur I ever met, because she was constantly creating organizations, but more importantly, she was getting us to create them with her. And whenever you saw Elly, you got an assignment. I mean, you could never get out of an assignment. She did recruit me very early on to the Women's Forum, but she took me to, I went to her apartment for breakfast, and she explained to me I was the new president of Hunter, though I had known her in the 1970s when I first came to New York. But she made me promise that I wouldn't tell anyone what my age was, because I was still in my 30s, and she said, you know, that won't do, but just use your title and don't tell anyone how old you are. But I remember Elly as a very tough person who held us accountable. She was just different from everybody else. She could bring us together, but she also wanted to make sure that we followed up on whatever assignment she gave us. And even when I was a cabinet secretary, my secretary would come in and say, Elly Guggenheimer is on the phone. Should I give her an appointment? And I said, don't you dare. You know, let me take the phone call, because I knew there would be accountability there, and I would hear from her again. But she was an extraordinary person. She affected our lives, women's lives in this community, more than anyone else I know. She had the courage of her convictions, but she also was fun and funny, and she got us to do things like sing in her musicals when we had no skill levels.
I think that's such a good point. All of us remember Elly as fearless.
Yeah.
Absolutely fearless. Did you have what you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to say a few comments. I'm Kay Koplowitz. I first met Elly in 1984. David Rockefeller introduced me to her, actually, when I came to New York, and I had already started USA Networks and was in the media business at the time. So I met Elly, and we had this long conversation about what she was doing, and I was really impressed, even though I was living in a world of men only at the time. So it was really a wonderful introduction to have been made. And I have to say that all the things as a social entrepreneur that she was doing influenced things that I did in my company at the time. So I have to say I'm here as a beneficiary of Elly's vision and her power and her enormous energy. And the fun thing about it was that Karen Gerard, do you remember Karen? You know, she was at the mayor's office for a number of times. So anyway, Elly and Karen and I shared the same birthday. So we would get together every April 11th and go to, you know, no. Thank you. But that's not the purpose of it, to say that it was so much fun for a number of years that we would gather together on her birthday, you know, go out to lunch and tell stories and learn things from her, but in a funny sort of way, because she had this infectious laughter that really, and it taught me about the fun of being in business, even though I was heavily driven, I must say, but I was privileged to join the Women's Forum and to participate as program director and a lot of other things that were really fun to do. So I just wanted to celebrate Elly because she was such an influence in all our lives, but to say that she had a big influence on me and the policies that I had at USA. I instituted, support for women at birth, so we had maternity leave, at the same time paternity leave. I thought it was really important for men to understand what it was really like to go through and to have that important moment in their life to share with their wives. And it was really interesting to me because the people, it just wasn't common. And here we were, a company of a few hundred people at the time, and it wasn't common to do that. But I really wanted the men that worked with us to really understand the importance of knowing your infant and your wife's journey through childbirth. And it really was a popular program at USA, and I really had that to thank Elly for teaching me. So I just wanted to say, what a great thing.
I think that one of the things that comes across to me is people have said, Elly's name is not widely known in the International Women's Forum, and that is absolutely true. And certainly as the years go by, that is even more true. But what is remarkable is the idea that she had, which was so revolutionary at the time, has affected the lives of 8,000 International Women's Forum members in 70 countries on 6 continents around the world. They may not know her name, they will not know her name, but she has affected their lives the way she's affected so many of the lives of the people in this room. And that's called making a difference. That is really quite astonishing. Any other stories that folks would like to share? Anything from the family, Jane and Rose? Yes?
You said it all here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, this has been a marvelous opportunity for all of us to gather together. This will not happen, this kind of intimate conversation, in 4 weeks at the IWF in May, but it's really wonderful that it can happen here.
Thank you.